So the very first thing that we need to do is to validate whether our environment is up and running, whether we have not incurred excessive cost. I would say as an admin, when you basically look into Sentinel deployment after the Sentinel environment has gone into production, and once in a while you would want to look at the deployment to see how it is working, whether expected outcome is achieved or not, whether things are working as expected, whether service is healthy, and the service related uh, issues, all that comes into the admin's kitty. So the very first thing that you would like to see is that whether the per day log volume ingestion is as expected. That's the first thing that an admin would like to check. Second, whether the service is behaving as expected. Second thing. Third, whether all the required, let me also make a note of it. So I'll open my session transcript. So job responsibilities of an admin, or you can say in the XC terminology, engineering team. Now, the first job responsibility is to initiate, design, discussion with the client or customer, design and architect the solution. This is when you are into project. Design and architect Microsoft Sentinel implementation. Now, in this design and architect, everything will come, which includes uh, discussing in terms of what will be the data sources, what will be the logging requirement, auditing requirement the customer has, whether Microsoft, non-Microsoft data connectors, deploying syslog server, all that comes into the design and architect Microsoft Sentinel implementation, which includes deployment and configuration of data connectors, configuration of out of the box, as well as custom analytics rule, configuration of playbooks, integrating playbooks with analytics rule, all that comes into the design and architect. And then you implement the solution, implementation of Microsoft. Okay, so it's already there, design and architect, Microsoft implementation. And once that, and then you hand over okay, so hand over to operations team via UAT. And then comes operational aspect, optimization. Then comes Microsoft Sentinel optimization. Now, first three phases are basically before you deploy the product, after the product is deployed and product is implemented, and then comes the operational aspects of it, Microsoft Sentinel optimization. So we are done with the handover to operations team. In fact, in the last week session, we looked at how an L1 engineer picks up the incident, investigate the incident, resolve the incident, change the incident status, how it forwards that incidents or how it assigns that incidents to different team members, activity log. We looked at all the investigation part last week. And in fact, we also looked at that if they have appropriate access, if the operations team has appropriate access, they can also pick and choose the automation rules or playbooks that they would want to run based on an incident, if it is not part of the analytics rule. So we have seen all that last week. Now we are looking once again at admin, that now that the service is in operation, it's in production, Sentinel is in production. What is the task of operations what is the task of operations team is to operate the service day in, day out, around the clock. However, what is the task of admin team? Admin team will still need an accountability here. Why? Because the service needs continuous optimization. So Microsoft Sentinel optimization. Now, what would include as part of optimization? As part of optimization, the admin team needs to ensure service. Now, when I say service, I'm talking about Sentinel. They need to ensure that service is operating as expected. Now, how do they ensure that service is operating as expected? By connecting with the operations team, by connecting with the operations team's member and asking the right question in terms of whether it is working as expected. Are you facing any issue? Has there been any lag in the service? Did you come across any strange error? Anything that was not usual? Any anomaly? That is what you need to do. That is where you will know whether service is operating as expected. So this is discussion. This is basically manual discussion. And second is validating the service health. So you need to look at service health, and this is from the portal. From the Azure portal, you can look for any service health, and from the service dashboard also it shows you the health of the service. So you will need to validate the service health. Then you also have responsibility on the cost because you're also connecting with the client, probably on a monthly basis or bi-monthly basis. You have a discussion with the client also, and you present how you have been managing their security environments, how have you been managing their security monitoring using Sentinel. So you need to present. Now in that presentation you will probably talk about the highlights and lowlights of service, anything that you would like to do as an add-on, if there is any update available that you would like to do, if there is any additional capability available, then you would like to discuss on the commercials before you take permission from the customer to implement it, and also need to talk about the benefits that it brings on the table. So it's more of a consulting work that you do as part of optimization. So which is where you also need to look at the cost optimization. So for cost optimization, you need to validate per day log ingestion volume. And when you look at per day log ingestion volume, you will need to identify any anomalies, because when you go to the workspace, the log analytics workspace, which is connected to the Sentinel, you will see the workspace insight, which is the workspace workbook or workspace dashboard powered by Azure Monitor. And that insight gives you all the information. So this is my workspace. I'll directly go to insights here. And in this insights, I'll get the information about the workspace. So the very first thing I would like to look at the health of the workspace. So whether there has been any health issues, it says reporting no operational errors or warnings, and service state is available, and no workspace issues detected. Because Sentinel service is nothing but workspace. Sentinel is a Microsoft managed service. Microsoft is responsible to manage it, but workspace is your service that you have deployed and configured and designed and implemented. And Sentinel has a huge dependency on workspace to analyze the logs. So you will need to make sure that your workspace is operating properly. Look at the agent. If you can identify any agent which has not been reported, anything of that sort, you can find out here the agent information. Oh, where is my virtual machine? Okay, they are here. It is not coming because these virtual machines were turned off for the last 2 days. I would say on Friday EOD I turned them off, and the entire Saturday and Sunday. And this morning they have been turned off. That's the reason it says agent as one, because only one agent is working, which is my laptop. because my laptop is an example of an on-premises endpoint, which is also getting monitored in Sentinel. So if I go back to the insights once again, I'll only see one agent, which is sending the heartbeat. And you can see per day log ingestion also, daily usage also. I have also provided you with a KQL query that will also give you the same information, the log ingestion volume. Now, in the log ingestion volume, here you see the anomalies. So you will need to look at these anomalies, that how the log ingestion is, what is the trend of log ingestion. So you can see on a specific date, say on 7:30, it was 13 MB, today it is 2 MB, and this is how you will see the ingestion anomalies. So if you find any ingestion anomalies, you will need to look for ingestion anomalies, that there is a probability that all of a sudden log ingestion from a specific data source has gone up, and it has gone significantly up, or it has gone drastically down. They both are anomalies. If it has gone down, probably the service is not operating, service is not receiving logs. The source has some issues. If it has gone drastically, significantly up, then also there is an issue. Maybe the configuration has got modified. There's misconfiguration in the service, because you cannot get more than expected logs from a service. Probably you have done the log optimization when you have identified that you would not want performance logs coming from the virtual machines. But now all of a sudden performance logs are enabled, and you're getting GBs of performance log every day. Definitely this will have an impact on the cost at the end of the month. And performance monitoring is the job of infrastructure monitoring team. So why would you need performance logs? Because you never decided in the very beginning with your customer that you would also monitor performance. So you will need to look for ingestion anomalies. That is very important from the cost optimization perspective. So this is what you need to do. And then other than this, as an admin, you need to identify any introduction of additional capabilities in the service. So if there are any additional capabilities that has been introduced by Microsoft, that Microsoft has come up with, let's say, Content Hub, and it has accumulated all the solutions in the Content Hub, and it has also come up with some additional data connectors. For example, there was a data connector that can help you to, there was a workbook which can help you to identify how the migration is performing. So that was a workbook related to migration validation or migration tracking. So if there is something new, and if it has a value to your customer's environment, you will discuss it with your customer during your monthly, bi-weekly or weekly cadence, and have it deployed and implemented. So identify introduction of additional capabilities in the service, and then implement them. Implement the additional capabilities, and then you will also need to ensure the updates on the service. Now, when I say updates on the service, am I talking about updates on the Sentinel? No, not at all. It's a fully managed service from Microsoft. Microsoft manages it. What I'm talking about here is building blocks. You will need to look for updates on the building blocks. There are building blocks for the Sentinel. Now, what are building blocks? For example, the example of building blocks could be solution upgrade. So in the Content Hub, you have solutions. For example, you have deployed Azure Active Directory, which is a solution. Now that solution has, the solution comprises of some analytics tool, some workbooks, some playbooks, some hunting queries. So you will need to validate if there is any update available to solution. Update basically means maybe some component will get deprecated. They will be removed. Some new additional components will be added. So you will need to ensure that will upgrade the solution. That's the first thing. Second, log analytics workspace. Updates to log analytics workspace, which is very important because log analytics workspace is basically giving intelligence to Sentinel. And when I say update to log analytics workspace, it also includes agents. So if there are updates available for agents, you will need to look for it. Now, agent update is also automatically handled by log analytics workspace. It can update the agent via extensions. However, you will need to manually ensure whether all the agents have the same version, they are updated. That is what you need to ensure. So update to log analytics workspace and agents. This, when I say update to log analytics workspace, this also includes uh, making sure that the daily cap ingestion, you have a daily volume ingestion, daily cap configured, you have retention configured. So you need to validate those options as well, whether my retention is configured as expected, whether daily cap is configured. If it is configured, then what is my per day ingestion? If my daily cap is, let's say, 20 GB and my per day ingestion is 30 GB, which means I'm losing 10 GB of logs. So you will need to discuss with the customer, identify what that significant increase in log is, and if it is justified, then you will need to increase your daily cap also. So that comes into the update part. So updates to log analytics workspace, update to Sentinel, solution upgrade, if there is any which is available in the content hub, that's what you need to do. And in the solution upgrade, now this would include everything basically. This would include if you want to collect any additional log sources, which means if there is any update to data connectors which is available, any new additional data collectors which are available. So this also includes detect, which means there are new analytics rule available and you would like to uh, you would like to implement or install those analytics rule. This also includes investigate. There are new capabilities available in the incident dashboard. So you would like to understand those capabilities and implement it for your customer. So this includes investigate. This includes automate also. There are new playbooks available and you would like to integrate those playbooks, etc. So solution upgrade would include all the phases of Sentinel. I don't want to write them separate and explain them. It would make more sense when you include it under solution upgrade. So these are the job responsibilities of an admin and engineering team. This is what you need to remember. Now, there is a high probability that engineering team in DXC only takes care of solution deployment, solution implementation, design, architect, and implementation. And then there is a separate admin team within operations whose job is to take care of the optimization part, service optimization. That is their responsibility. So even if there's a different team, here's the task for that team. However, in small deployments, what I have seen that you don't have a separate admin team. It is the same team that is responsible for deploying Microsoft Sentinel for existing and new customers, as well as managing the administrative aspect of it, administrative task of it. It is the same team. So this includes collect. Collect means identification of new use cases, creation of use cases, and then deploying data connectors for those use cases. If data connectors are not available, then looking for custom options to enable those use cases. Detect, which includes creation of analytics rule, both custom and out of the box. Investigate, which includes ensuring that incidents are getting converted from analytics rule, from threat detection rules. Incidents are investigated, and there are changes to investigation dashboard, incident investigation dashboard, then including those capabilities and educating the operations team about those capabilities and enforce and encourage usage of those capabilities so that they can get benefited from it. And then automation and so solution upgrade, which also includes if there is anything that needs to be upgraded. So upgrade to log analytics workspace, which includes agents as well as daily cap, ingestion volume, retention, This is what you need to do. So these are the responsibilities of an admin or engineering team. I'm open to questions. Yogesh has a question. We are collecting all logs from Linux servers as per best practice. Which log shall we collect? Only security? No, Yogesh, it depends. I'm saying security is for sure you need to collect. But other than security, if you would like to see, security is the main log that you need to collect, from from Sentinel perspective. But if your customer would want you to collect some additional logs, which could include performance logs at times, or which could include any additional logs that you can discuss with your customer. But security is the main log that we collect. So and as long as you're collecting security logs from Linux servers, that is more than sufficient from the from the security monitoring perspective. But what I have seen in some organizations, that other than collecting security logs, you know they also collect update logs when Linux servers are getting updated. So they connect with yum repository or any repository that has. So they collect the repository logs also, that when repositories are getting updated, when endpoints are getting updated, Linux servers are getting upgraded, they also connect those logs. Sometimes they also connect performance logs. Sometimes they also uh, they also collect logs related to mount point, logs related to any third party services, like you have NetApp share, or let's say in AWS you have file services. So file services are mounted on Linux servers, or Azure NetApp share NFS, network file share volume, is mounted on a Linux server. So they also collect logs from those NFS also, because those logs can also point towards some security misconfiguration or probable security incidents, because at the end of the day, those are data repositories. You are storing data in those repositories, and that data is shared across the application, across the stack, or across the organization. So you should also look at the probability of connecting those logs. All right, so these are my job for an engineering team, right? Now comes the job for my operations team, job responsibilities for operations team. We have mixed of participants, so we need to cover both the job responsibilities for operations team. Now, I will give this opportunity to both operations team as well as engineering team. Engineering team will think what should be the job responsibilities of an operations team as per the SOP or as per the standard, a universal standard. An operations team themselves will look at what they do day in, day out, and what kind of responsibilities they take care of, irrespective of the level that they are at. I mean, see, if you are an L1 engineer, but you actually know that your operations team comprises of L2 and L3, you will need to identify those job responsibilities. So let's do this quick exercise. I'll give you this quick exercise. I'll give you 10 minutes. I want you to note down the responsibilities of operations team, and this is for both engineering and operations team. Let's see what you can collectively collate, and then we'll go through it and we'll put that into the transcript so that we can finalize it. And probably this will help you in your organization to put together the responsibility boundaries between admin and operations team. So let's do this. I'll give you 10 minutes, guys. It's 9:34. In 10 minutes, you need to identify the responsibilities of operations team the way I have identified it for admin team. So let's see who can identify. Now, I would be looking forward to operations team members to provide me the information, because they are the one who can provide the actual information. Thank you. Triveni, you need to ask anything? Let me know.
No, Raghuveer.
Fine-tune false positive alerts. What else?
Other thing might be to monitor the heartbeat of the devices. If some device is not sending the heartbeat, just coordinate with the engineering team to find out what exactly is the problem.
Mm-hmm. So monitor the heartbeat or monitor the availability of direct agents which are ingesting logs via gateway, as well as syslog data sources. Okay, great. This is a great point. So this includes all the data sources which are ingesting data via agents, which are ingesting data via gateway server, which are ingesting data via syslog server, CEF, format via syslog server, all the data sources, which also includes collectors, MS and non-MS collectors also. Okay, so which is great. What else?
Then monitoring of the alerts that come, investigate it in a proper way, and if it's a true positive, then escalate it or check with the concerned team. And if it's false positive, get confirmation and close the alert.
So you're saying incident investigation,
Yeah.
resolution, communication to services team if required. Okay, great. That was great, Mitchell. Thank you so much. Moving on. Sandhya, Sandhya, do you think anything else can be added here other than what Mijun has already identified?
Yeah, I have the similar points as well. Okay. Uh, and we have to report the um, whatever we done to daily basis, like how many true positive or false positive in a day. We have to document it.
Okay. Okay. Guys, please disregard letter E from my keyboard. Some maybe that key is not working fine. So document and report incidents to higher teams or let's say management. Okay. What else? All right. That's okay, Sandhya. All right. Let's see what else you have got, guys. So this is what Triveni has provided, monitoring the alerts or incident, investigating true positive on proactive way and escalate the next level if required. Great. Identify the false positive and recommend for fine tuning. Is good. Monitoring the device's reporting status. If any device is not reporting, inform to engineering team for troubleshooting, which is great. Yep, that is great, and you can do this device reporting status via. This can be done via dashboards. So you can have log analytics dashboard open. You can have dashboards available for data connectors also. For example, if you are not getting enough information from Active Directory, sign-in logs or audit logs, you have dashboards available. So you can quickly go to that specific workbook or dashboard, and you can see whether you're receiving logs or you're not receiving logs. So you can inform it to engineering team. Great. Uh, I've also received great inputs from Yogesh. Let me write it down here.
Hello, Raghuveer.
So Yogesh is writing monitoring the heartbeat of server devices, which is good. Incident investigation, yes. Prioritize and triage incidents, which is good. Hunt for threats that have made their ways into the network. Identify unknown vulnerabilities and security gaps. Okay, great. Great input, Yogesh and Triveni, both of you. Yes, who was talking?
Yes, Raghuveer, I'm
Create
Satya.
runbook handle incident for team runbook. This is a debatable subject. Create runbook, Triveni. Typically, runbooks are created by admin team because operations team may not have access to create runbooks or playbooks. Are you talking runbooks? Do you
Um,
mean by runbooks SOP
no,
or by logic
no,
app?
Raghuveer. I'm talking about run books related to that alerts or incidents.
Yeah, Triveni, Raghuveer, I think the point Triveni is trying to highlight is for SOPs, which we do create in our team.
Yeah.
SOPs.
Okay, SOPs is okay. SOP operations team can definitely put together. However, if you look at the broader aspect of it, SOPs are also initiated by admin team, engineering team. They will put together SOPs and operations team is expected to adhere or to follow those SOPs. However, during operations team and admin team will have a discussion, bi-weekly, bi-monthly discussion. In those discussions, operations team member can put together suggestions for the improvement in the SOP. And those improvements will be done by the admin team because in the SOP, you will have information with respect to the version upgrade. With every improvements, there will be an upgrade. There will be an introducer, somebody who introduces that improvement and somebody who validates it. Because SOPs are one document that will be shared with the audit. So when there is an audit that happens for the organization, let's say ISO audit, SOC 2 audit, or any audit that happens in the audit, the very first thing that the auditor would like to have a view on is the policies and processes that are being followed in the organization. And SOP is part of the policy. So SOPs is a shared responsibility between admin team and operations team. Now, what will be the share? Whether it will be 60-40, 80-20, it differs from organization to organization. But always remember, majority of the share will be held by the engineering team most of the time. And that is why, what is my next level from operations? If I'm part of operations, what do I expect? Where do I see, let's say a couple of years down the line, or what do I aspire to be at the next level? My next level is admin. From operations, I would like to move into consulting. I would like to move into architecting, which is admin team, so that I can utilize my knowledge and experience and I can deploy efficient implementations, efficient design and architecture of Sentinel going forward for my existing as well as new customers. So that's what is the responsibility. Okay, I'll finalize this, guys. I'll finalize this in the session transcript, the responsibilities later on, probably later today. Uh, Satya also has a point, performing scan on devices, identify possible threats, providing possible solutions to mitigate them. Absolutely. However, there, as I said, it will be a shared responsibility, Satya, because you may not have appropriate access. See, it is not about the knowledge. It is not about the skills. It is about responsibilities. I'm sorry, it is about access. It is about the RBAC and ABAC. Based on who you are, what role you play in the team, you will be
Hello,
granted
Raghuveer.
access. Yes.
Yeah, for some means we usually get selects from particular devices, and we are directly asking the users at the end of the investigation to provide them, asking them to perform the scan on devices. Based on that, if
Hmm.
we identify any threats, we are suggesting them
Hmm.
either to containment or reimage. Based on the identified threats, we are suggesting
Uh,
them. If everything is clean, we are closing the cases false positive. And for servers, there is some separate vulnerability team. I agree. For particular devices which we
mhm.
are handling the incidents, we are taking the action. Means we are not performing, we are asking users to perform and share us the logs. It's
Yeah,
also
that's
part
a
of
great point.
our yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. So as I said, with operations, it is a shared responsibility between operations and admin, and the level of access differs from organization to organization. You just need to identify the key, KPIs, key performance indicators, or key pointers, or key tasks for Sentinel, and then you will need to divide and distribute among operations and admin team. Now, in operations team, you could have multiple layers, which is L1, L2, L3. In operations team, there are times when you only have one layer, which is operations team. All are equivalent. All have the capability. Sometimes you have rbac, sometimes you have identity and access management very stringently deployed in the organization, wherein people are restricted. They have knowledge, but they cannot perform. They will have to escalate it or forward it to the next level, assign a new owner by providing appropriate activity log in the Sentinel incident console with respect to what they have done, what they have observed, and what needs to be done by the next person team who they are assigning this incident to. So that is what you can do. And based on how you put together your responses, that is where people see credibility, people see your abilities, and your management is then encouraged to move you to the next level because they understand that this person knows the roles and responsibility of the next level. This person is ready for the next level. So that's how you basically move from level 1 to level 3, or level 2 to level 3, and then to the other teams, engineering teams. Okay, so this was about the job responsibilities of admin and engineering team, which is very important for you to understand. Sentinel may have 100 capabilities, and definitely you will not be able to cover all the capabilities. Even if you're able to cover some of those capabilities, you cannot do the lab hands-on. But this is very important for you need to understand. The building, the base is very important. So this is the base of security monitoring solution, and we primarily focused on Sentinel while we put it together. Okay, great. Now, my next topic is migration. Migration from an on-premise, or I can say third party. Now, this why I'm saying third party, because sometimes you have SaaS version also. For example, Splunk comes into SaaS version. You can go for Splunk Enterprise Security, and you don't need to deploy anything. It is all pre-configured. All you need to do is to identify your data sources, configure them, and start monitoring the environment. You don't need to build the deployment of Splunk. So third-party SaaS solutions, migration from an on-premises or a third-party SaaS solution to Microsoft Sentinel. So this is my objective, to understand that how do I do the migration? What will be the phases involved? So my question is, what are various phases of migration? And what are my various phases of implementation? Now, implementation, in case I'm implementing it Greenfield, which is from scratch, there is no security monitoring solution exist in the organization, and we are deploying Microsoft Sentinel from scratch. And phases of migration basically means that we are migrating from an existing SIEM solution to Microsoft Sentinel. So those are my two use cases. Now, when it comes to phases of implementation, I'm saying Greenfield. When I say Greenfield, life is very smooth. Why? Because why life is smooth is you don't have anything that you need to consider. You don't have any overhead that you will need to look into, identify the challenges, think of the solutions, and then implement the same. It's Greenfield. Phases of migration is Brownfield. Something which is there, and you will need to take input from this. So it's Brownfield basically. So phases of implementation, if you want to see, I have already shown you in the last week, which is first, I'm saying when it comes to the phases of Greenfield, it is the very first thing is designing the architecture, designing the workspace architecture, which includes all the use cases that we talked about, all the the decision tree, which basically varies from whether you are a company with single tenant, multiple subscription, multi-tenant, multi-subscription, based in one geography, based out of multiple geographies, whether you have you have challenges on log ingestion. I'm saying whether you care about egress volume, so that you can identify a workspace architecture where you want to create multiple workspaces, or you want to create one workspace and ingest logs from other locations to that workspace also. So all those use cases or parameters that we went through last week on Wednesday, which is our day 6 of session, that includes designing the workspace architecture. Once that designing workspace architecture is complete, then remember at the very high level these phases. So collect, detect, investigate, and automate, or we can also call it remediate, and then administrative, and then optimization. So these are my phases. Now optimization is a common phase because it's a continuous optimization of the service. So these are my phases when it comes to various phases of implementation, Greenfield. But when it comes to Brownfield, what are my phases? So when it comes to Brownfield, the situation will remain the same. There is absolutely no change which is going to happen here. And why there will not be any change? There will be a change. I'll talk about that change also. Okay. So when it comes to Brownfield, definitely you need to design the workspace architecture. That step is common. Then comes the collect part. This is where the change will be there. This is where you need to analyze data sources, use cases, automation, etc. So you will need to collect. First of all, you will need to collect the information, and probably this part will come even before the designing the workspace architecture. This initial analysis, I'm saying this collect, you can say that this is prior to it. Gaining, you can say in standard language, you can say visibility into existing SIEM deployment. So you need visibility of existing SIEM deployment, that what that SIEM is, how. Now you don't need to get into the details of it, that how have you deployed it. No, that's not needed for me. As an admin person or as an architect, what I'm more concerned or more care about is what are the use cases, what are the data sources. So I need to know that what are my data sources that I need to monitor, and what all use cases are you currently monitoring. Because when it comes to migration, definitely I will need to ensure that everything that currently exists will reflect into my target solution, which is Microsoft Sentinel, plus over and above the additional capability that my target solution brings on the table, and those capabilities which influenced or encouraged the customer to migrate it from that existing solution. So that is what I need to be taking into consideration. So visibility into existing solution, and this is where you will collect all the data. So you will collect, and then comes your collect phase, wherein you will deploy the data connectors, you will deploy the log sources. So this is what my brownfield architecture is, that visibility into existing SIEM deployment, designing the workspace architecture. So once you get the visibility, you will get to know your data sources, you will get to know everything, and accordingly you will design your workspace architecture. You will design your data collectors, and you will configure the data connectors. You will configure the gateways if if required. You will configure the agents, direct agent if required. And when I say agent, going forward, uh, all the engineering team members need to make sure that if you are deploying Sentinel, or if you're currently deploying Sentinel for your customer, start using or monitor log agent instead of log analytics agent, so that you don't run into another implementation probably a couple of months later when the customer comes back to you telling you that they have received a notification from Microsoft that log analytics agent is going, it is getting deprecated. And now Microsoft is recommending us to upgrade, migrate to Azure Monitor Agent. And then the customer is also complaining at the same time, were you not aware of this change when you did the initial implementation? And if yes, then why did you not bring it to our notice? Why did you not implement it then itself? So you will need to take care of that part also. So this is the same thing that you need to do in Brownfield as well as in Greenfield. These are the phases. Now, Microsoft has a great documentation. Microsoft has this documentation also available. So Microsoft Sentinel has a documentation. So there's a documentation available for migration scenarios, and Microsoft has a documentation available for migration to Sentinel from various existing SIEM solutions. It has a general documentation as well as service specific documentation. So let's look at that documentation. But before that, I would like to show you a migration plan, a migration project plan from one of my previous deployments. I have intentionally removed the references for the customer as well as from the MSSP who was involved into the migration, just to ensure that there is no conflict. And here is the plan. So this is my migration plan. This is Microsoft Azure Sentinel implementation work plan or migration work plan. Now in this scenario, the scenario was that the customer is from a financial industry and customer has multiple offices in countries like US, Europe, India, and Singapore. So primarily they were based out of 4 geographies. US, in US, they had some offices in West Coast, which is in California. Europe, they had presence in Netherlands and Sweden. Then they had Asia Pacific, which is Singapore, and they were extending to Malaysia while we were doing the migration. And then in the end, India, they had offices in Bangalore and Gurgaon. So this is about the customer. Customer was using Securonix from Dell. Securonix is also a SIEM solution. So customer is using Securonix, and they are now migrating from Securonix to Microsoft Sentinel. And since this migration happened at the beginning of this year, when Microsoft Sentinel used to be known as Azure Sentinel, now it is Microsoft Sentinel. So this is the plan. The other thing is, why were they migrating? Because majority of their infrastructure is hosted on Microsoft Azure and AWS. Slowly and gradually, they were phasing out everything from on-premises. So since they had majority of their infrastructure in Microsoft Azure, they also had direct connect with Microsoft. They were assigned a technical account manager, and that technical account manager proposed Microsoft Azure Sentinel. And technical account manager, along with the pre-sales or along with the solutions enablement team, also did a presentation to the customers, decision makers, or the customer stakeholder, and they really liked Microsoft Sentinel, and they decided to go for it. And Microsoft also sponsored them for the initial couple of months of running in cloud with Sentinel, which means customer is not expected to pay even a single penny for the entire implementation, as well as for initial few months of operations in Azure in Sentinel, which was for 3 months. So 3 months of free, 3 months of free operations, complete operations, as well as the entire implementation was free of cost. That was the commitment from the Microsoft. Then Microsoft doesn't do all the implementation by itself. Microsoft has vendors who are expert in a specific technology, which is Azure Expert MSP or Microsoft MSSP, Microsoft Security Service Provider. So Microsoft roped in one of the Microsoft Security Service Provider for this deployment, and that is where our team came into the picture. So Microsoft introduced us to the customer, and then Microsoft also aligned one coordinator or one representative who will take care of the coordination part. That's how this project got started. So this project almost took 10 weeks to complete, 12 weeks to complete, which was around 2.5 or 3 months. Yeah, that was 11 weeks. So we completed this project in 10 weeks, 2.5 months. Okay, this is how the project is. I'll upload this into the Google Drive for your reference. So phase 1 was planning and resource mobilization, wherein the scope discussion happened between customer as well as the implementation MSSP team. The final scope was agreed. This was very important because you have a timeline. I'm saying customer may come back with a lot of additional inputs while you are implementing the solution. They will come back to you and say, do this, do that, do include this, include that, and that will unnecessarily extend the timeline of the project. So you will always need to finalize the scope with the customer. Lock the scope with the customer that this is my scope. And how do you lock the scope? By identifying, since this involved an existing solution, we had 2 rounds of meetings wherein the engineering team of Securonics gave us a walkthrough of how Securonics is configured, what all use cases they have configured. So we got that walkthrough. So we had all the information about the existing deployment, and then we put together our plan that this is what we are going to work on. So we would include everything that you have currently in place, plus the additional capabilities that Sentinel brings on the table. So that's how we were able to finalize the scope with the customer. So after the scope was finalized, we also identified the resources at our end and allocated them to the project. We discussed on the prerequisites with the customer. Now, what will be the prerequisites here? That gaining access to the customer's Azure tenant and subscription where Sentinel will be deployed, and also gaining access to the on-premises infrastructure or getting introduced to the team which is responsible for on-premises infrastructure, which has the capability. So what we were doing, we were sending them agent binaries, agent MSIs, so that they can deploy those MSIs on all the data sources, on all the endpoints through push installation from Software Center or from SCCM or from any application packaging software that the customer was using. So we were either doing the deployment by ourselves or we were sharing the prerequisites with the customer team so that they can take care of it, because they were not ready to grant us administrative access to those services. So this is what was happening. Configuration of prerequisites, it was not already set. So this was my mobilization phase, planning and resource mobilization. Then comes design and deployment, wherein we enabled the Sentinel service. We enabled Azure. We looked into, so we identified in this design, since it involved Europe, so what we identified that we will have multiple workspaces. We will have 2 workspaces for each region. So 2 workspaces for India, which includes the Singapore part also, and 2 workspaces for Europe, which is production and non-production workspace, 2 workspaces for US. So that's what we decided. So in total, we had 6 workspaces, 3 production and 3 non-production. Why did we take into consideration non-production workspace? Because some of their applications has a pre-prod environment, and pre-prod environment is an exact replica of production environment. So they also wanted us to monitor the pre-prod environment, and hence we decided to build non-production workspaces also, because there we will fine tune, or there we will restrict the logs that we want to capture. So this is how we decided on the log analytics workspace architecture, creation and configuration. And then we onboard the workspace to Sentinel service. We onboard the Azure virtual machines to the respective log analytics workspace. We enabled native Microsoft log services. So after then this is my collect phase. So in the collect phase, I have onboarded all the virtual machines, or we have onboarded all the data connectors, out of the box data connectors like Azure Active Directory, Activity Log, Security Center. Now it is Microsoft Defender for Cloud. Earlier it used to be Security Center. We onboarded the on-premises test Windows and Linux servers. So what we did, first they wanted us to show them a POC of Sentinel in the project itself. So they provided us access to some test workloads from on-premises, so that we can demonstrate the capability of Sentinel, that this is what Sentinel is monitoring. This is how the dashboard and workbook looks like. This is how the investigations are incidents are investigated. This is where the automation comes into the picture. All that we wanted to showcase before we get into the actual implementation. So we did onboard some test Windows and Linux servers to the respective log analytics workspace. We verified that the log collection was happening. Logs were getting ingested. We looked at the ingested data, and then we also created some sample dashboard, workbook, and playbook to showcase the capability to the customer. That comes the phase 3, wherein we did a full-fledged POC to the customer, executive team that involved the CEO, that involved the CFO, and the senior leadership team of the customer, wherein we showed the capability of Sentinel, and we included all the use cases that we wanted to demonstrate. So we wanted to demonstrate the use case of Lighthouse. We wanted to demonstrate the use case of file integrity monitoring, UEBA, all the capabilities of Sentinel we included into the POC. So after the POC was completed, they really liked it. They had some inputs. So we took note of those inputs, and we incorporated those inputs into the implementation phase. And this is where the implementation phase is, wherein we ran the project full-fledged, and we started enabling all the native log sources which were available out of the box. We also enabled all the in-scope Windows and Linux servers from on-premises, from all the locations to their respective log analytics workspace. We enabled all non-Microsoft cloud services. They had some presence in AWS, and they recently onboarded to GCP also, because customer did not want vendor lock-in. So they were thinking of adding some applications, some test applications into GCP. So we also onboarded the GCP project that they had built. So we onboarded 2 AWS accounts, 1 GCP projects, and all the Microsoft subscriptions which were there. Then we deployed the syslog server, because we wanted to onboard the logs from on-premises devices. Those had the capability to send logs in common event framework in CEF format. So we deployed the syslog server, and we configured the syslog server to accept logs from on-premises devices. That includes my Linux servers also. So on-premises Linux server were sending logs to syslog, and all the Azure Linux servers, they were sending logs to the respective log analytics workspace via direct agent, which is the log analytics agent. So we configured third-party log sources also from the networking devices. We verified that we were receiving. Now this is the phase where you spend most of the time, because things will not be plain, things will not be smooth. When it comes to networking devices, when it comes to the syslog server configuration, when it comes to injection of logs, you will find a lot of challenges, because things will not be smooth. Your engineering, your implementation team will come across challenges, because every device vendor has some specific nitty-gritty that you need to be aware of. And there are times you need to connect with them, because you do the configuration as per Microsoft documentation, which has the information about network devices also. But there are times when logs are not getting ingested, or you're expecting unnecessarily volume of logs that you don't need. So a lot of effort goes into this phase, wherein you are configuring the logs from on-premises devices. Logs from cloud services are very easy, because you have connectors available. But from on-premises devices, it is a bit difficult. At times, you need to build a custom connector also to ingest those logs. So once those logs were ingested, once we are done with that, we verified and collected logs from in scope devices. And then we also, so this project also involved creation of 2 custom connectors. So we also created 2 custom connectors for on-premises log ingestion. And then once the log started to show into the workspace, and this, log insights workbook was not available at that point in time. So we were using KQL queries to ensure that we were receiving logs from all the, data sources. Deployment of existing use case. Now this is where comes the picture. So since they were using the existing, they had an existing solution. So we also took note of all the use cases that they have configured. And that's where we created threat detection rules, comprising of all the use cases that they had by using the custom threat detection rules, which is custom analytics rule, sorry, the out of the box analytics rule, as well as we ended up creating some custom analytics rule because we wanted to include all the use cases. And then we also created some additional custom use cases. I'll also share the list of use cases which are possible in Sentinel. Now that will not include all the use cases because the product is dynamic, the requirements are dynamic, it will continue to change, but at least you will get to see something that was applicable till the beginning of this year. Okay, creation of new use cases as per the requirement. And this is the another thing that we did as over and above the Sentinel. Since they were into financial services, they had the obligation of storing the log for 7 years. That was the requirement because they also had NBFC solution in India, which is where they were offering loans to customers. You can take an example of Bajaj Finance or Cholamandalam Finance, any NBFC, non-banking financial corporation, Shriram Finance, Arite Birla Finance. So they also had NBFC. So they had the restriction or the audit requirement that they need to reserve logs for 7 years, retain logs for 7 years. So what we did, we also configured Azure Data Explorer, and we configured Azure Data Explorer to stream logs from Sentinel connected log analytics workspace after 2 years. So we configured 2 years of retention in the log analytics workspace, and post 2 years data will get ingested into Azure Data Explorer. However, during the implementation, Microsoft added the capability of KQL to Azure Data Explorer. And that is where the game changed all of a sudden. So now instead of storing the logs, retaining the logs in log analytics workspace for 2 years, we were only retaining the logs in log analytics workspace for 90 days. And post 90 days, we were now streaming them into Azure Data Explorer, where the logs can be retained for 100 years. That way, we optimize the cost of the solution. And since Azure Data Explorer has the capability of KQL, if customer wants to investigate an old incident, they have the KQL available. Using KQL, they can get the appropriate data. And since Data Explorer is directly connected with Workspace, the data can be ingested back into the workspace, and then incidents can be created from that, historical data also. So that was the capability that we enabled. And then we also enabled UEBA in Azure Sentinel, which is the additional capability, which I'll show you today how to enable it. And we also enabled cyber threat intelligence in Azure Sentinel. They had cyber threat intelligence feed coming from a third party, so we also integrated it. So this is what we did in the implementation phase. Once the implementation was over, we also deployed Azure Lighthouse here because the customer also had some additional tenants. Because they were present in multiple geographies, they had also acquired some companies, and those companies, they never consolidated the directory structure. They let those companies run independently because they did not want to change their brand name in US. So we also deployed Azure Lighthouse so that they can also manage those tenants, those additional tenants belonging to the other companies that they deployed. And we provided, then we had been given the list of team members at customer side who will be managing the show in the, in the production, in the operations. So we also granted them appropriate RBAC, and we validated their access. We also run a separate audit here to make sure that the identified team members have only the least privilege access to the service or role that they need to deliver. And then in the end, we schedule the UAT, user acceptance testing or knowledge transfer to the SOC team. Now this SOC team belongs to a different company altogether. So we have three parties here: customer, we who are doing the implementation, and then there is a third party, who will be acting as security service provider for the customer. So we did the onboarding of their users and everything through Lighthouse for this third party. And in the end, it was handed over to the third party for the security monitoring and management operations. And we provided them a week of hypercare, wherein we designated two team members, a senior team member and a junior team member, to remain available during office hours, identified office hours, and to support the operations team if they need any assistance. So that's how this project was implemented, which included the migration from an existing SIEM solution. And the same implementation plan can be used for a Greenfield and Brownfield migration, because it hardly makes any difference. You're not doing any migration of the existing solution to cloud. You are just migrating the current deployment, which means the use case that you are monitoring from that existing solution to cloud. So that's all you need. So this was in detail a typical Sentinel migration or implementation, which is both Brownfield and Greenfield from customer, which is a financial customer which has presence across the geography. Now that decision tree was not available at that time. So we almost spent 2 to 3 hours in discussion with the customer team to identify the design of our workspace. Today you have a decision tree available. I shared the URL with you. It will hardly take half an hour for you to connect with your customer side stakeholder and design the workspace architecture by making use of that decision tree. So service is getting optimized. I'm saying Microsoft is adding more capabilities in the handoff architectures and implementation team so that they can do quick implementation and architectural design of Sentinel. So that was about the migration part. Do I have a question from any participant before I make a move? Okay. So I'll share this with you I'll upload this into Google Drive. Now let's look at the documentation. As I said, Microsoft also has documentation for the same. So Microsoft has a documentation. If you are into the migration of an existing SIEM to Microsoft Sentinel, Microsoft has a documentation. Let me share the documentation URL with you. Give me a moment. Okay, here's the documentation. I'll share the documentation URL with everyone. I've also put that into the transcript. Okay, it is there in the chat box. You can see it from here. Okay, so here's the documentation for plan your migration to Microsoft Sentinel. And this documentation, you can see that they have not updated this documentation for almost 8 months from now. And so we are in July. This was last updated in December. Give me a moment. All right. So here's the documentation that you have. You can go through this documentation. Why did they not change anything in this documentation? Because there is absolutely no change in the approach. So these are my migration steps. You can take it from here at a very high level, that how do you plan your migration? This is exactly where you are. Track migration with a workbook. Now this workbook, this is the same workbook that we have enabled into our Sentinel deployment. And here's the workbook, because this workbook will basically help you to track your migration. So here's my workbook. If you want to see, so I'll go to workbook directly, and here under saved workbook, I will see my workbook, which helps me to track the migration activities, which I explained in the last session also. Here's the workbook: migration, Microsoft Sentinel deployment, and migration track. So I can click on view saved workbook. I can also modify this workbook by adding some additional areas that I want to look at that I showed you last time. So this is my workbook. It is just not refreshing.
Hey, Raghu, your Excel sheet only is visible right now.
Say again, what are you saying? I could not get it.
I can only see Excel sheet, not the workbook which you are talking about. I think you need to share that screen.
So that screen is shared. Are others not able to see the workbook?
We can see the Sentinel.
Yes, we can see.
Oh,
Okay, so you just need to
Amish,
refresh your
okay.
screen. Not able to see it. All right, so this is the workbook that I was talking about, right? So you can see this workbook. Right now the query is failing. Why it is failing? Because there could be, because first of all, I don't have my services running. Now in this workbook, you can see migration tips also here, and instructions also available in this workbook. So you can also verify this migration tips. In fact, when you click on this docs.azure Sentinel migration, it takes you to the same documentation. It is the same documentation that you are. Okay. So this was my workbook that I have. Now it says migration from ArcSight. Now this is what you have, ArcSight. So it has documentation available for migration from ArcSight, Splunk, QRadar, 3 solutions: ArcSight, Splunk, and QRadar. Now ArcSight is your solution, so you can follow these 3 documentation here, which is migrate detection rules. So you have detection rules in ArcSight, migrate SOAR automation, and export historical data. Because you don't, sometimes you also want to, migrate the historical data. When I say historical data, historical logs, historical incidents into Sentinel also, or you would want to export them and store them for audit and historical record perspective. So that guidance is also available in the documentation. So let's open all the documentation. So first, the detection rules. Now this is the documentation for migrating the ArcSight detection rules to Microsoft Sentinel. Here you will see all the information that you need, that how do you migrate your analytics tool to Microsoft Sentinel. So it basically talks about an SOP, a process that you will put together. And with that process, you can do all of this. So you have uncoder.io also, wherein you can convert your detection rules to KQL queries. So you can use this solution. So the entire documentation gives you guidance on the migration from ArcSight to Sentinel. It also shows you some rule terminology, that what terminology we use in ArcSight and what is the relevant comparative technology in Sentinel. For example, you say filter rule, here we say schedule query. Here you say join rule, we have Fusion. You see active rule list, we say Microsoft Security. So some comparison is also given. Map and compare the rule samples. Here you have comparison also available. So all of this information, which is a great, it says filter and example ArcSight. This is how you will see it. So since I have not worked with ArcSight, to be honest, that I told you on day 1, I may not be able to talk about how it looks like, but I have given you all the knowledge that you need on Microsoft Sentinel. And plus this documentation, which will help you to migrate from ArcSight to Sentinel, if that is the case in future. Give me a moment. So this is the documentation that gives you all the information, which will help you to convert your existing detection rules from ArcSight that you call it filter rules or whatever to Microsoft Sentinel detection rules, which is analytics rule here in Microsoft Sentinel. So this is the entire documentation. Go through this documentation. This documentation will give you a lot of insights. I'm saying this will make your life more easier when you are planning migration from ArcSight to Sentinel, and not only ArcSight, when you are planning migration from Splunk or QRadar to Sentinel also. Even if the solution that you are migrating, let's say RSA Archer, let's say Alert Logic, FireEye, or any other third-party SIEM solution which is not given here, just read the guidance for any of these solution, and that would give you enough input for that solution that is not shown here, because the process will remain the same. The process doesn't change. And then it says there is one, okay. And then it says convert dashboards to workbook. So workbook, I have already shown you that workbooks are available in Sentinel. Out of the box, workbooks are available along with the solution, and then you can also create a custom workbook that we have already shown, and we have seen that those workbook can also be shared with people. You can save them, you can create Azure dashboard from those workbooks and have them streamed on a big screen in the SOC and NOC room. So that's what you can do. Okay, migrate SOAR. You want to migrate the automation capabilities which is there in ArcSight to Microsoft Sentinel. Here's the documentation for the same. This is for the migration capabilities, and you can just go through this documentation and see what all capability it brings on the table, and whether it really makes sense, whether this documentation really is a great piece of advice, great piece of input that you have got today. Then the third one, which is export historical data from ArcSight. So if you want to export the historical data, this is how you can export it to ArcSight. So it has got three options you can see here, which says this is your source SIEM. Now source SIEM is, if it is on premises, then you are definitely keeping some data in some folder, in your data repository. So this is how you can export that to three different options. There are three different options here, which is you can export that historical data directly to Azure Data Explorer, which is your long-term retention service in Sentinel. Or Azure Data Explorer can be connected not only with Sentinel, with other services of Microsoft also, like Azure Data Lake, Data Factory. So it's a storage service, basically long-term retention service in Azure. You can directly send those logs to Sentinel. When I say Sentinel, it basically means to the log analytics workspace, which is connected to the Sentinel. To one of the log analytics workspace, you can send it to. Then it will become your live data, not the historical data. Or you can send those logs through Event Hub, or through, you can export those logs to a storage account also. And in storage account, you can store those logs probably in the cool tier or archive tier, so that you have lowest cost storage option available. So instead of keeping them in the hot tier, because those are historical logs, you will not need them every now and then. So probably you want to keep them in cool tier or archive tier, or you want to start with those logs into the cool tier and then enable lifecycle policy on your storage account, which will then move those logs after a specific period of time, let's say 30 days, 60 days, to another tier, which is archive tier, which is the lowest cost storage option tier in Microsoft Azure. So those are the three options which are available for exporting historical data from ArcSight to Sentinel, or from any solution to Microsoft, not Sentinel, to Microsoft basically. So this is the option that you have. So these three documentation pages, three URLs will have enough information, probably not all the information that you may need, but more than sufficient information available that will help you to migrate to Sentinel from an existing solution. Let me know if you have any question here. All right. Another thing that you need to be careful about, or that you need to take into consideration, is the additional resources. On Microsoft Azure documentation, you also have links to additional resources that may also be of some use for you. So, for example, while it is giving you this information, it also says that you have a workbook to track your migration. If you are into the design discussions, or you are going to be in design discussion phase, please go through this documentation. This talks about geographical availability and data residency in Microsoft Sentinel, that where Microsoft Sentinel is storing the data. Microsoft Sentinel migration update SOC and analyst process. So it shows you all the documentation that you will need for Microsoft Sentinel, related to Microsoft Sentinel. Okay, so this was about the migration, and here is the key migration phases for Microsoft Sentinel. You can see here. So this key migration phases, I will say, if you're creating a migration project plan, the way I had shown you one on a spreadsheet, you can create that plan keeping in consideration this documentation. I say you can just convert it into a Microsoft Project Manager, Microsoft Project MPP, or into a spreadsheet, which would involve 4 phases, which is discovery phase, design phase, implement phase, and operational phase. And for each phase, the key activities as well as key deliverables are also given. So I'm saying this is just an input from Microsoft. There's a high probability that you can take this input and customize it based on your project and specific customer requirement. So you also have that phases and key activities mentioned here in this documentation. Okay, and once you are done with it, then it says track your migration with a workbook. So that workbook is very important for you, because that workbook will always tell you what is your percentage of completion, percentage of implementation, because you will always compare the output of that workbook with your project plan and see, and you can quantify it, that how many data sources are supposed to be ingested, logs from data sources are supposed to be ingested, and what is the current number of data sources ingesting logs into Sentinel Workspace. So that way you can quickly quantify the percentage completion of migration. Okay, once you are done with the migration, there comes a cutoff phase. So you can decide collectively, mutually with your customer, that when they want to do a cutoff. So whenever they want to do a cutoff, you will stop ingesting logs, or you will stop the collectors in the existing service, and now you would focus more. So you will ask your operations team to switch to Microsoft Sentinel, Sentinel dashboard, instead of continue to working with the existing solution. So that's where the cutoff phase, you can decide when you want to go for a cutoff phase. So this document gives you all the information. So that was about this document. Okay, so this is all about migration phase. If you don't have any question, I would highly recommend you to go through this documentation to understand the migration process, nitty-gritty of migration, and probably you can ask questions, tomorrow if you have, if you have any questions with respect to this. I have another documentation which, which I got from Microsoft when I was working with Microsoft. Let me show you the documentation, which is on a long-term retention. Give me a moment. So whatever documentation, whatever information I present on the screen, I'll be uploading, I'll be sharing all of it with you on last day of the training. So this is the documentation from Microsoft. I'm saying this is something which is not available on public domain. This is Microsoft internal documentation. Now this documentation has all the information with respect to long-term retention for Sentinel data and for all the use cases. So at a very high level, you can understand we have 3 options here. First is Log Analytics Workspace, which is connected to Azure Sentinel, and where the maximum retention is 2 years. Then we have a solution which is Azure Storage Account, where we have maximum retention of 400 years. But then the challenge with this solution is that you cannot query the data here. This solution, Storage Account, doesn't have the capability to run KQL queries. So you cannot query the data. You will need to export that data back into Log Analytics Workspace if you want to query some information. So that's the drawback of blob storage. But the third option, or the option in between, is Azure Data Explorer, which provides you unlimited retention. Unlimited means unlimited, but the default is 100 years. And with this, you also get log and telemetry data. And here you will have KQL query option also. So you can query the data. So you have also this option available. Now here it says the performance. So if you keep the data in Azure Sentinel, definitely you will get a high performance because the data will be live. You can quickly run a query, KQL query, and you can analyze the data. You can in fact use your analytics rule or hunting queries to analyze the data. If you keep the data into Azure Data Explorer, you will have the option to run KQL query, but it will not be live data. And if you keep that into blob storage, then it is completely low performance because the data is nothing but historical data. If you want to read that data, if you want to get any intelligence from that data, you're investigating an incident and you want to know whether similar incident occurred in the past with the same entity in question, you cannot query that in blob storage. You will need to migrate all the data to Sentinel, then only you can query it. So it's the model in which it works. Sentinel is SaaS and great model. Data Explorer is PaaS, which is a good model. And this is IaaS, which is a fair model. Cost, you can see keeping anything in Sentinel has a high cost, medium to low, and it is probably lowest cost option available. So this is how you compare the long-term storage options which are available, retention options which are available in Microsoft Sentinel. And then you have all additional information in this slide, which is how do you export the data? How do you export data from on-premises or from one option to another option? So multiple capabilities are given. It talks about that you can also use logic apps to export blob data, blob storage data using logic apps. So you can see, so you can create a logic app and you can export all the data, export and import both. You can export all the data from Sentinel Analytics Workspace to storage and vice versa whenever you need it back. So you can use it. And then it also shows you the document for that, for this capability, as well as there are something that you need to know with terms of the limits, pros and cons also of this approach. So it gives you all the approaches, the documentation reference to that approach, as well as pros and cons and use cases of that approach, that in what scenario you should be using that approach. So you can see all the approaches are there. If you want to integrate Sentinel directly with Azure Data Explorer, here's the integration, wherein the log sources will be enabled to send logs simultaneously to both Sentinel Workspace as well as Data Explorer. However, this approach will unnecessarily, I'm saying this is not the approach that we configured for the customer that I showed you the project plan for. Microsoft basically showed us this approach and said that why don't you use this approach? Why don't you simultaneously ingest logs into Sentinel as well as the Data Explorer? Now, the challenge with this approach is cost, because if I ingesting logs in Data Explorer at the same time and to Sentinel, and if I'm keeping logs here, let's say for 6 months, and after 6 months, I'm ingesting all the logs from Sentinel to Data Explorer, then I will be paying double the price. So this approach is not good from the cost perspective. But if the customer does not have enormous volume of log sources, log data, then this approach can be considered, because with this approach, you don't have to configure the ingestion from Sentinel to Data Explorer in past. So you can directly ingest logs to both these services. This is one approach. This is the second approach, wherein you can ingest logs from Workspace to a storage account. And then from that storage account, you can ingest those logs into Data Explorer also. And then in the backend, Data Explorer uses Data Lake to store that data. This is another approach. Then this is another approach wherein you can do the integration and say, so Microsoft basically given you multiple approaches, that this is your data sources. You can first ingest logs into the Sentinel, keep them for a couple of months, and then you can export those logs to Data Explorer directly from Sentinel Log Analytics Workspace, or first you can export those logs a storage account, and from storage account, whenever you need to run queries to those logs, whenever you need to do investigation, then you can copy on manual basis all of those logs to data factory, and from there you can ingest it to data explorer. Now, earlier there was no direct method to ingest logs from data storage, from blob storage to data explorer, and you had to take data factory in between. But now we have a direct option also available that we can ingest logs from storage, Azure storage to data explorer directly. So you don't need this additional component and cost of this component. That's it. So these are some long-term retention or storage options available in Sentinel using different terminologies which are available, and for each there is a documentation link and pros and cons also available along with the use cases. So while you pick up and choose one of these retention strategy, one of the integration strategy, you need to make sure that you take into consideration the cost, have your customer educated about it, take binding from your customer agreement, and then implement it. So we basically implemented wherein we had logs ingested into Sentinel Workspace, retained there for 3 months, and post 3 months, they will be exported to Azure Data Explorer via Event Hub. That's what we did, at the beginning of this year, from December and January. So that's how we did that, which was one of the options. So I'll share the documentation with you also. Then comes the use cases. Now, when it comes to the use cases, there are some common use cases which is applicable to both sides of the world, whether you deploy third party, whether you deploy a Sentinel from scratch, or whether you migrate from third party to Sentinel. So I'll show you some of the use cases. So I've got some documentation here. This is one documentation which shows you all the use cases for SOC and SIEM use cases. And here's the use cases. This is for Windows, the one that you see here. These are Windows use cases that you can configure. A lot of use cases here. Then we have use cases for SIEM. For Unix. These are the use cases that you can configure. You can just pick and choose use cases that you need to configure based on what you agree with your customer, because configuration of use cases involves cost from implementation as well as retention perspective. These are the use cases for firewall, antivirus, IPS, and VPN. These are the use cases for security devices, which is firewall like Checkpoint, Palo Alto, Cisco, ASA, any firewall. And these are some use cases for email integration also. And these are use cases for VPN. You have use cases for Cisco IPS, IDS devices, use cases for proxy. So these are the use cases for Oracle DB, routers and switches, antivirus. So this document has probably exhaustive use cases available for SIEM deployment, whether you deploy them in Azure via Sentinel or on premises. So this is common documentation for use cases. Then I have Sentinel specific use cases documentation also available. I'll show you, and I will share all of this with you. Now, this is Sentinel specific use cases, some of the use cases that we put together. So here's the use case. Some use cases are for Windows, some use cases are for Linux, some use cases are for Azure. So, and we have already configured some of the use cases in our lab. For example, we configured this use case in our lab, which is Azure NSG rule modified, because NSG is your virtual firewall front-ending the service, firewall and NSG rule. And if they are modified, you should quickly get an incident. The priority of the incident you can always keep low, that is okay. However, you should get notified. So here's the description of it, that modifications to Azure Network Security Group rule, which may leave a host vulnerable to an attack or indicate suspicious activity in the Azure subscription. So that's the use case that we have already configured. Interactive logon from service account, short-lived account, Linux use cases, Azure use cases, Sentinel alert change, Azure public IP address. This is another use case wherein a public IP is added or removed from any service. You should get notified because it has a probability of creating security incident or security vulnerability into the system. Any Azure resource deleted, you can create a use case. However, to fine tune this, instead of any Azure resource deleted, identify the resources which are critical to your customer, and then fine tune this use case to only create custom analytics rule or query for those resources instead of doing it for all. Because if you want to do it for all, the query is very simple. You need to write Azure activity and all administrative changes. So you can write a quick query because this information will be coming from Azure activity log, which will be an administrative event, and that event will say update to a service and the switch is delete. So whenever a service deleted and the activity is successful, you will quickly get the incident. This is Linux cron job running out of temporary folder. That's another use case. So this is one sheet for use cases, which is specifically for Sentinel. At a bare minimum, you will configure these 20 use cases for Sentinel. I have another list for use cases. These are common use cases for Sentinel, wherein Windows failed logon attempt, Windows security event log cleared, somebody delete the security event log by going into the event viewer from a server, then it's a perfect use case. So these are some common use cases for SIEM monitoring. Then we have some documentation from Microsoft also, wherein Microsoft has also identified some use cases for Sentinel that you can configure. These documentation are not available on public domain, as I said, so I'll share it with you. I have received these documentation directly from Microsoft by way of my association with them. Okay. This is one documentation which says Azure Sentinel top use cases. Now in this document, they have use cases for most of the Microsoft services. It includes Windows and Linux virtual machine also. So this is use cases for Office 365. So all of these use cases that you see, these are the use cases. And for these use cases, for most of these use cases, you have out of the box threat detection rule available, analytics rule available. For some of them, it is not available, then you need to write a custom query. So these are the use cases for Azure AD sign-in and audit logs. And the data source for this use case is Azure AD. So you can configure these use cases. This is how the use case is configured and you see it. So this is for sign-in logs and this is for audit logs. This is basically showing you a workbook that they have configured. This is sign-in logs. Then Office 365 email activity tracking and data exfiltration. Whenever there is a DLP data breach, this is the use case. Then you have use cases for monitoring teams collaboration within Azure Sentinel, use cases for monitoring Intune. If you're using MDM, mobile device management through Microsoft Intune, you have a use case for it. You have use case for AWS also. If you have presence in AWS and you want to monitor your AWS deployment through Microsoft Sentinel, these are the use cases that you can quickly configure. Right now, we have configured in our lab the integration with AWS Cloud Trail service, which is equivalent to activity log, and all the administrative changes, events in AWS is getting reported into our Sentinel workspace. So these are some of the use cases that you can configure in AWS, which is when somebody changes to AWS security group, which is similar to network security group in Azure. When somebody, credential abuse or hijacking, which is brute force attack, changes to AWS Elastic Load Balancer security group, changes to VPC settings, new user agent observed in 24 hours, log into AWS management console without MFA, somebody is logging in without MFA or bypassing the MFA, changes to internet facing AWS RDS databases. If there are AWS RDS databases, which is equivalent to Azure PaaS, if there is any changes to them, you can also configure it. Changes made to AWS Cloud Trail logs also. So these are some of the common use cases for Sentinel with respect to AWS. And similarly, you have, use cases, this is Mitre attack for AWS Cloud Trail, SQL Server use cases, the DNS threat analytics use cases, UEBA use cases, third-party threat intelligence. If you want to, as I said, we also integrated third-party threat intelligence feed into Sentinel because they had third-party threat intelligence feed subscription from Strix. So we also configured it. So you can also configure this use case wherein you will ingest threat intelligence from a third party to your Sentinel service. So there is a use case for it also. This is use case for SQL Server with Azure Sentinel. That was SQL Server in PaaS. This is SQL Server in IaaS, DNS Threat Analytics. So all of this information is available here. So these are some of the use cases that you can configure in Sentinel, which is from Azure. There is another documentation for use cases. Now this documentation is available on public domain, which is top 3 use cases for threat investigation, threat detection and investigation with Sentinel. This you can search it on the internet. You will find it. So these are the top 3 use cases, which is anomaly detection, prioritizing alert into incidents, and investigating threats. So you can read this documentation. This also gives you great insights that how do you configure all of it. So these are some of the use cases that we have. Now the documentation that I showed you in the very beginning, which is the SIEM, SOC SIEM use cases. This is comprehensive and exhaustive documentation. You will hardly find a use case. I'm saying there is a very low probability that you have a use case in mind and it is not reflected into this documentation. This is a very exhaustive documentation and contains use cases for almost anything and everything. But taking this documentation into consideration, along with the other documentation that I've just shared with you from Microsoft, as well as custom use cases in the spreadsheet that I was showing, if you collectively take them all into consideration, take my words, there will not be even 1% probability that you have a use case in mind and it is not there in those documentation collectively. It will be there. And then it differs from customer to customer, that what, depending on the size, scale, and complexity of a customer, that whether you want to deploy 20 use cases, whether you want to deploy 50 use cases or 100 use cases. The more use cases you deploy, the more complexity you bring into the environment, but the more visibility you also get at the same time. So deploy a bare minimum use cases, which is the bare minimum, as well as some additional use cases, depending on the services and data sources that the customer has in place. So this was about the use cases that you can deploy in Sentinel. In our lab environment, we have deployed the use cases on AWS, on NSG change, on private endpoint change, on brute force attack, on brute force attack on RDP, as well as brute force attack on Azure portal. Those were the 5-6 use cases that we have deployed in our lab environment. So that was about Sentinel migration and use cases that you will need to consider or deploy. Let me know if you have any questions so far.
Hi, Raghuveer.
Yes, Triveni.
Yeah, I have a question related to migration. Like if customer want to migrate from AWS or GCP from that to Azure, then the process and phases are same or is it different?
Okay. So if the customer is looking to migrate from AWS, then the service in AWS is guard duty plus detective. That's the service in guard duty, which we use for SIEM. And the SOAR capability in guard duty is provided with a combination of AWS config plus CloudWatch log group plus Lambda. This is the SOAR capability in AWS. So with the combination of AWS config plus CloudWatch log group plus Lambda, you bring the SOAR capability, and the SIEM capability is with guard duty plus detective. Now in AWS, you have some additional services also, which basically give logs to guard duty service. Guard duty is your threat detection service, similar to Sentinel. but we have additional services which gives log to guard duty. Similar to Microsoft Azure, wherein you have Microsoft Defender for endpoint, Microsoft Defender for cloud, Microsoft Defender for M365. Similarly, here you have AWS Inspector, which is your VAPT service, vulnerability assessment and penetration testing. You have AWS Systems Manager, which is your complete AWS EC2 instances, a management service. So Systems Manager also sends log here. So Inspector, Systems Manager. Then you may have logs configured from CloudTrail, which also gives intelligence to guard duty, which is very important. You have logs configured from AWS IAM, which is equivalent to Azure Active Directory. Here you have a separate service, which is IAM Identity Center. Which we also call it aka SSO, single sign-on. So basically in AWS, this is the service for SIEM. This is the SOAR capability, and these are some of the default connectors in AWS. I'm just trying to connect it with Microsoft, language, Microsoft Sentinel language. So these are my data connectors. And then we have custom connectors, or we can call it third-party data sources. This is how AWS looks like. Now the question is, when I migrate from AWS to Microsoft Sentinel, will the process remain same? Yes, the process will remain the same. This is Brownfield. The process will remain the same. These are the phases. So you will first need to have visibility into the existing SIEM deployment, which is this part. You need to have visibility in terms of what all use cases are deployed, what are my data sources in AWS, how they have configured the automation part. That's what you need to have visibility on. And then comes the deployment for Sentinel. So when you deploy the Sentinel, you will just need to configure Sentinel and make sure that you onboard all of these data sources into Sentinel. So how will you get the logs from Inspector, Systems Manager, CloudTrail? That's what you need to look for. Now, in AWS right now with Microsoft, only two capabilities are available. So when it comes to Microsoft Sentinel, what kind of data it can get from AWS is AWS CloudTrail, which is the activity log data from AWS, plus S3 data. This is the current capability that we have, which means what you need to configure all the data sources in AWS that you have. You need to configure logging of those data sources to AWS CloudTrail so that those logs are stored into the CloudTrail, and then from CloudTrail they can be ingested into Sentinel via AWS data connector. And for S3, you have a separate connector, so you can directly ingest the logs into Microsoft Sentinel. This is for the services. Then comes devices. For devices, you can directly ingest the logs by deploying Azure Monitor Log Agent on AWS EC2 instances or AWS auto scaling instances. So that's how you can get the logs from devices as well as from services. Now there is no router and switches in AWS because you don't have, these services in cloud. So that's what you need to do. Any AWS service that you have, you will need to enable logging of that service to CloudTrail so that logs can then be forwarded to Sentinel. And for S3, you have a direct connector. So that's how you do migration from AWS to Sentinel. Then comes the GCP part. If you want to do the migration from GCP, from Google Cloud, the service in Google Cloud is Chronicle. That's the name of the SIEM service. So Chronicle is the SIEM service. And there is another service which is Simplify. This is the source service in Google Cloud. So what you will do now, both the services, Chronicle and SIEM, Simplify, they both are acquired services by Google. They are not native services of Google. So what you need to do, you will identify the same thing. You will need to first identify that what are my data sources in Google. Now, Google when it comes to categorizing the service, Google has a dashboard which is known as Security and Command Center. So Security and Command Center is the dashboard in which all the security services are collectively shown. So you will need to identify all the services from Security and Command Center which are configured in Google Cloud, which will be similar to this Inspector, System Manager, CloudTrail, and you will need to ingest logs of those services to cloud activity. Google also have a log which is known as cloud activity, similar to CloudTrail, and then you have a connector available in Sentinel. So you can see the connector here in Sentinel that you can use. So this is my connector. Over here, this is my connector, Google Cloud Platform. Let's see details of this connector. So this is my connector. So right now what it says Google Cloud Platform IAM, which basically means you can ingest IAM logs into IAM logs from Google Cloud Platform. It says this connector has these many. So it has one data connector, one parser, so that you can parse all the logs from Google to Sentinel, one workbook, which is nothing but the dashboard that will show you all about Google Cloud, 10 analytics rule, 10 hunting queries. There is custom Azure Logic App connector is also available, and 3 playbooks are available. This is what is available in this connector. So basically using this connector, you can ingest logs from Google Cloud. So what your strategy will be? Your strategy will be to create a parallel solution first of all. So when you are doing migration from one cloud to another, you will need to build a parallel log ingestion. So first do a parallel log ingestion, which means you are ingesting logs in the existing solution, whatever it is in Google Cloud, you're doing it, and simultaneously you are ingesting logs, ingestion to existing as well as Sentinel. That's what you need to build in Google. I'm saying in Cloud. So build the ingestion to existing as well as to Sentinel. And once that ingestion is built, then you will need to do a cutoff. So it will not be that difficult. I say migrating from one cloud to another will not be that difficult because you have automation available. You have integration available. Migration from an existing solution, on-premises, legacy, or third-party SIEM solution to a cloud solution will involve some administrative effort and will involve some unknowns as well, some challenges as well. From one cloud to another, it will not be that difficult. Does this answer your question, Triveni?
Yes, Raghuveer. Thank you.
Any other question, guys?
Yes, Raghuveer. For the custom logs integration, how we can ingest the logs from those devices?
So what can you explain that? And see, what do you mean by custom log integration?
So suppose an organization is using some application, okay, that for that connector is not available. So how we can collect the logs from that application? That application is storing the logs, we can say in a log file on the same server.
Okay, so if that application does not have data connector, see there are two options in this case. You can write a custom log connector, custom data connector. Second, if that application has the capability to send logs in CEF format, Common Event Framework format, then from CEF, you can ingest that logs to syslog, and from syslog, you can ingest it to Workspace. That's the option that we have.
So there is no syslog forwarding option on the device for on that application. So we have to go with the custom data connector method.
First of all, does that application, so what is, can that application send logs in CEF format? That's the question.
No, there is no option for CEF. No.
If there is no option, if this option is not available, let's say this option is not available, then this is the option that you are left with, which is the custom data connector. You will need to write a custom data connector for the application.
Okay.
So
And where we write this?
Yes, Yogesh.
Where we write this custom data connector, which path we have to follow in Sentinel, which directory?
If you want to write a custom data connector, first of all, let me show you something that will clarify. Let me show you Sentinel architecture first. Give me a moment. Let me get that architecture. Where did I put it? Just give me a minute, I'm just looking for that. I'm just looking for the latest version of it. There's the latest version available for it. Fine. So there's the this is the high level architecture of Sentinel that you can see here. Now in this architecture, is this architecture visible to everyone first of all?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So let's understand this side, on-premises side of it. Okay. Over here. So the blue box that you see, this is for Microsoft Sentinel. In this box on the top, it starts with built-in data connectors. These are the built-in data connectors for Microsoft Sentinel. And these are non-Microsoft data connectors. They are also built in. So we have Microsoft data connectors, which is basically for Microsoft services. We have non-Microsoft data connectors also, which is for non-Microsoft services, which includes, and this list keeps on getting added. I would say this list is dynamic. They keep on adding new and new connectors in the form of solutions now in the content app. So today, maybe there is no data connector available for Palo Alto, but tomorrow there will be a data connector available. So that's non-Microsoft data connectors. Then you have at the heart of Sentinel is the log analytics workspace, because that's the heart and brain for Sentinel. And in the log analytics workspace, you have standard logs, you have custom logs, which are getting ingested through custom connectors that I'll show you, log management, and you have workbooks, which is nothing but the dashboarding. And all of this can be queried through KQL language. You have alerts, you can create automation rules via playbook, which is Logic App. You can use incident security alerts. You can use user and entity behavior analytics, in the in the Sentinel, and you have threat hunting also available, which is threat detection rules available. Okay, and the Sentinel health and service update issue, you have health monitoring enabled for Sentinel, so that you can also get to the health details of the Sentinel, where service is functioning properly or not. Okay. Then you can also ingest all of these alerts, reports, tickets, and incidents to third-party solutions using third-party ITSM integration or Logic App to ServiceNow, Manage Engine, Zendesk, BMC, Remedy. Now come to the other side of it. So this is the on-premise. This is now come to the ingestion part. So the ingestion is basically possible through cloud-hosted services as well, which means you have Azure virtual machines, AWS virtual machines, GCP virtual machines, or other cloud virtual machines. On all of these virtual machines, you can deploy Sentinel agent. Now, what is the Sentinel agent? This is nothing but the log analytics agent or Microsoft monitoring agent. So you're deploying the agent directly on these data sources, and then the logs are getting ingested over SSL from these data sources to Sentinel Workspace. So this is how you're getting the logs. Then comes your on-premises side. Now in the on-premises side, you have servers like web servers, Windows servers, Active Directory, Windows Server, Linux servers, application servers, databases, and all of it. Now on all of these devices, you can directly deploy Sentinel agent, which is the log analytics agent, and then it can send logs over SSL to Sentinel Workspace. This is one option. The other option is probably you cannot deploy direct agent on these servers because you have certain restrictions. They are not configured for outbound to internet on 443. Then you can probably deploy a log analytics gateway here, Sentinel gateway here, and they can ingest the logs to gateway, and gateway will be, will have connectivity outbound to internet on 443 through SSL to Sentinel. So that's what you can do. Okay. Now for Linux, now for your devices like firewall, security appliances, LAN and WAN appliances, you have another option, which is all of these devices which have the capability to send logs in CF format. They can be configured to ingest logs to the syslog server that you have deployed here. This is Azure Sentinel syslog log collector. All of these devices will be sending logs to syslog, and then syslog will forward all of these logs over SSL outbound to internet to the log analytics workspace. So that's what you can configure here. And you can also configure syslog to send logs from Linux directly. Then you have legacy SIEM. Let's say you have a legacy SIEM. Now from legacy SIEM using Event Hub, you can also configure the logs to Sentinel. Or if you want to ingest Sentinel logs to legacy SIEM, then you can also do it through Azure Event Hub. And that's where your security operations center, which is working on various operational aspects of it. So this is at a very high level, the Sentinel architecture, which you can use. And this architecture also shows that how do you run managed Azure Sentinel services, which is for MSSPs. So this is at a very high level. Now comes that I have an application that does not have the capability to send logs in a format, in syslog format or CF format. Then how do I write custom connector for it? So we have that option available in Sentinel. Here's the documentation for it. So here's the documentation that you can use. Using this documentation, you can create a codeless connector for Microsoft Sentinel. So basically, this is a new service. I'm saying there are other ways of creating connectors, but I would rather recommend you to use this service because this does not require you to have programming knowledge or JSON or YAML knowledge in which you write custom connectors. This is codeless connector. This is the new service that Microsoft has released, and it is in public preview. And this service is working perfectly fine. So the Codeless Connector platform provides partners, advanced users, and developers with the capability to create custom connectors, connect them, and ingest data to Sentinel. And connectors created by Codeless Connector can be deployed via API and ARM template or as a solution in Microsoft Sentinel Content Hub. So there's a solution available in Content Hub through which you can deploy it. The connectors that you will create using CCP, they are fully SaaS and they don't require any service installation. and using these and create your connectors by defining JSON. Ultimately, in the backend, it is JSON, but this is a codeless connector, which is like a GUI method of creating connectors. So you can create this codeless connector, Yogesh, and deploy it via this, this solution, and then you can ingest logs from your applications. So you can go through this documentation, which will help you to get the knowledge on creating custom connectors. Other than this, if you want to understand the previous method, then there is this documentation that you can use. This is another documentation which gives you resources for creating custom connectors. So this is for all the connectors which are available. I will say these are all the custom connectors creation methods that you can use. Codeless connector, you can use log analytics agent, you can use logtash, logic apps, also to ingest logs from the, you can ingest log from the application in a specific format, then use a parser to convert that log into the format, either CEF or the format that Workspace understands, so that that will be stored into a table, and then a query can be run on that log based on the detection rule that you have configured. So that option is also available. So Logtash, Logic App, PowerShell, Log Analytics API, and Azure Functions. So these are my different capabilities available in Microsoft to create a custom connector. You click on any of this, and it will take you to the documentation of creating the connector. So you can go through these 2 articles, but I would rather suggest you to try this one, Codeless, because this is a new service and this requires less efforts on your end to know and write JSON or YAML scripts. I'll put that into the chat window. So this is for Codeless. This is for Codeless connector. Okay. So go through these options, Yogesh, and if you don't understand anything, you can discuss it with me probably tomorrow or day after. I'll see
Okay.
if I can share with you some custom connectors from my previous projects, if I have access to that. Okay,
Okay, Raghavi, thank you.
great. Any other question, guys? All right. If there are no more questions, let's take a break for 10 minutes and then we will move on to the next topic. So we are done with migration. We are done with the migration use cases. This is something which is great that you have made me make a note of it. This will help you with AWS and GCP in future if you ever get an opportunity, because the process will remain the same. We'll move on to the next topic, which is the automation part. So we are done with we are done with the collect phase, we are done with the detect phase, we are done with the investigate phase. Now we are on remediate or automation phase, and along with remediate and automation phase, we will also need to look at some administrative options which are available in Microsoft. Probably if not in depth, but at a very high level, so that you can understand it. Example, Lighthouse, probably you will not be able to do lab for Lighthouse, but I will have it configured and demonstrate it to you, and you can try it if you have access to multiple tenants. Okay, Quentin. So Quentin, I will say if you guys are available, we can extend the session for an hour. If not, then we can close the session at 12, and this 1 hour we can compensate in the remaining days by extending the session for 50-20 minutes every day. So I'm okay with both the approaches. I just need confirmation from all the participants, and we'll go with the majority. If you have a meeting, I can understand. This is first day of the week, and probably you have some BAU activities that are waiting for you. So we'll see. I'm saying whatever is the majority says, we'll go with it. Okay. What about you, Quentin, yourself? Do you have a meeting?
No, just a whole bunch of emails to get back to, but not a meeting today. Tomorrow and the next day I do have meetings straight after it.
Okay. I will not be able to extend. Yogesh has a meeting. What about others? Triveni, Shiva, Satya, Sandhya, Prashant. What about you guys? Okay, some people are fine. Some people, Satya is also okay. Guys, those who have a meeting can raise your hands. That is quick. I can see there are 14 participants in this session. Those who have a meeting can raise your hands and we can see. Okay, some people are okay. So Yogesh has a meeting, I can see. Okay, no worries, guys. What we will do, I'll see if I can extend the session by 15-20 minutes every day. Otherwise, depending on, see, the ultimate goal is to complete the topics which are there in the TOC and complete all your objectives, as much as possible. So I'm not able to extend through various. No worries, guys. What we so I can understand that you have a meeting, you will not be able to extend. I'll see the probability of starting this session. Let's say preponing this session by 15-20 minutes every day. I believe that is okay with everyone. Instead of extending the session, which may not be possible, we will see the probability of preponing the session by 20-30 minutes every day. If there's a requirement, if I see that I will not be able to cover, that is the right approach. Great. I have majority of the people agreeing for it. All right, so we will not extend the session. If that is the case, we will not take the break also. Let's just continue. Please bear with me for another 20 minutes. So we are done with this. Now, my next topic is some additional capabilities of Sentinel. Probably in 20 minutes, I should not start the automation. Otherwise, we will leave it in between. There are other topics that I want to cover, which is one of the topic on additional capabilities of Sentinel. So let's look at these additional capabilities of Sentinel, that what these capabilities are and how do these capabilities works and how do we enable it. My first capability is user and entity behavior analytics, which is very important. In the past, in order to enable this capability, I would have to write, use a connector and then write some script. But today it has become easy. Let's first understand what is UEBA in Sentinel. So UEBA in Sentinel, this capability in Azure Sentinel, it basically identifies threats inside your organization and their potential impact, whether a compromised entity or a malicious insider, and delivers high fidelity actionable intelligence so that we can focus on investigation and remediation. So I'm saying, in summary, this is the capability, this is the insider threat management capability of Sentinel. Now it is not with Sentinel, it is with Microsoft Defender also. Microsoft Defender also has UEBA. I'll show you where it has UEBA in Microsoft Defender. So even if you don't have Sentinel, you can still get UEBA capability up to a certain extent. Defender has the advanced capability. So when you navigate to Microsoft Defender for Cloud, and when you go to workload protection, this is where it includes UEBA capability. Now, the configuration part of UEBA has been removed from here. Earlier, the configuration was here. You just need to enable the service UEBA and it starts to work. So this is where you can see file integrity monitoring, FIM, just in time, and this is where you had UEBA. Now they have removed UEBA from here. If you want to configure UEBA, this is where you configure it from. So you'll go to Sentinel, and I'll show you how UEBA work real quick. So inside Sentinel, under configuration, there is an option that says settings. So you need to click on settings, and in settings, there is a second tab which says settings. Click here, and over here it says UEBA, entity behavior analytics. So Microsoft Sentinel's user and entity behavior analytics transforms raw data into meaningful insights. Now this is where the other day somebody asked me how Sentinel uses AI. This is where Sentinel uses AI. So how it uses AI, that it is analyzing the behavior of users, which is identities, and entities both. Now, what are my entities? Entities includes users, it includes devices, it includes IP addresses, it includes UPN, it includes location, it includes multiple aspects of it. Now, the entity here is the entity mapping that we do in threat analytics or threat detection rule. And user means user. User means identity. So what it does, it basically analyzes the user behavior and entity behavior. And it creates intelligence using AI/ML, using artificial intelligence in the backend. For example, let's say you have enabled a data protect, you have enabled a rule. So UEBA. Now how it works. So let's say you have a threat detection rule which identifies attempts, which identifies sign-in attempts from disabled user. And there is another threat detection rule which identifies Azure portal brute force attack. These are the two rules. Okay, the reason I'm giving you this example because we have them configured in our lab. Now these are the two rules which we have configured. Now we have received incidents from both the rules, and there are multiple incidents. Now in those two incidents, there will be a couple of things which will be common. That's what UEBA will work on. So UEBA will see that we have two incidents. It will quickly identify what is common here. Probably the IP address is common. Some of the incidents of disabled accounts that is happening from a specific IP address, and in some of the Azure portal brute force attack, the IP address is common. So there is a common IP address. There is a common entity here that you have, which is the IP address. This is what UEBA will quickly pick up. I'm saying when you are investigating the incident, these two are different incidents. Using incident graph API, you can combine these incidents, but that will not tell you that there is a similarity in the IP address. This is what UEBA will quickly tell you. UEBA will also tell you that other than IP address, for some of the incident, user is same. User ID is same. Or let's say location is same. So user location and IP address, this is what UEBA provides. So in 20 incidents which are across these two analytics rule, some entities are common. User location and IP address. Now what it will help you? It will help the operations team member L1 or L2 to quickly identify that this is my blacklisted IP address because my IP address is coming common, which means it is the same source, same location from where these attacks are getting simulated or triggered. So you will be able to take actionable insights. quick action on this. That is what UEBA is. So it is analyzing the behavior of user and entities. Now the other thing is this is also analyzing, for example, as I said, the same thing, that there is a same user which is logging from one location, from one IP address, and within 30 minutes there has been a sign-in attempt from the same user, but the location and IP address is different. And in both the cases, user is able to successfully sign in. Now, if the user is able to successfully sign in, there will not be any incident created. No incident will be created here because there's a successful sign-in. It would only consider brute force attack when there is a failed logon. Failed logon, and after the failed logon, as per Azure logic, there is a successful logon. That's what brute force attack for Azure is. But in this case, the user is logging in from India location, and from a specific IP address, user is getting successful. And within 30 minutes, the same user is logging in from America, from a different location, from a different IP address. And since it was a successful logon, there is no incident which is getting created in Sentinel. But this UEBA will capture it. UEBA has the intelligence to know that it is not possible for a user to travel from India to America within 30 minutes. That's the level of AI which is using in the backend. Same is the case with entity also, that your entity cannot change. So this is what UEBA is. And when you are investigating an incident, you will always see UEBA dashboard along in the incident itself, so that you can do that anomaly detection. Now I'll show you. So first of all, how do we enable it? You just need to click on set UEBA. And when you need to enable it, see, it will ask you the same information. It will say, okay, now you are enabling the UEBA, and UEBA means user and entity. So we need all the logs for user, and we need all the related information of entities. So for user, you will need to enable Azure Active Directory. If you want to enable UEBA, first turn this on. Only a global administrator or security administrator in Azure Active Directory can turn this limit on or off. Question: is there a separate charge for it? No, there is no charge. But does it involve any cost? Yes, login cost, because it will basically capture logs, it will store logs and perform AI ML, UEBA capabilities on it. So it will have substantial impact in the cost, on the overall monthly cost of the solution, but the service does not have a cost. It is only the log storage cost that you will pay. Okay, so you will need to enable UEBA when you have these many rights, which you already have. Then you will need to enable the Azure Active Directory logs, so that all the sign-in logs and audit logs, come. And then you will need to select the existing data source you want to enable for entity behavior. So first you have selected the Active Directory, and in the Active Directory you have these logs. So it needs audit logs and sign-in logs plus Azure activity logs, because from Azure activity logs, it will capture the IP address and location. And from audit and sign-in logs, it will capture the user behavior. So using these log sources, it will capture the user behavior and entity behavior. And all of this needs to be stored here. So it says, or after connecting the following data sources, you will be able to enable them for entity behavior analytics. So all of this will be stored into the security activity. Security you also need to integrate. So this is already integrated security events. This is from legacy agents. If you have legacy agents, now what do you mean by legacy agents here? Legacy agents basically means your log analytics agents. So we don't have log analytics agent configured here. All my agents are Azure Monitor log agents, but if you have log analytics agent, you will need to enable the security event as well. And to enable it, you just need to click here and create this policy. Right now it says apply changes because I don't have any legacy agent. That's the reason it does not show me the option, but I can do it here also. So if I have agents, legacy agents, or if I want to download legacy agents, I can also install legacy agents on Azure virtual machines like this. But since I'm using Azure Monitor log agent, I will not do it. So this is how you enable the UEBA. And once you enable UEBA, the Sentinel will start to analyze users and entity behavior. and it will need at least 14 days to create a trend. It will create a trend first, and then it will see whether there is an anomaly in the trend, whether there is a deviation in the trend. For example, a specific user always logs in from India, Bangalore. Now the user is logging in from Russia. Then it's a change in behavior of user. The user is logging in from a specific IP address. Now the user is logging in from another IP address. Change in behavior. This is what UEBA will capture. It's a great service that you must enable. And as I said, it has a very substantial cost, cost iota. So you should not bother about it. So once this service is enabled, this is how this service will show you its capabilities. So if I go back to incidents, since there was no incident generated in last 24 hours, I'll go to last 14 days of incident. Now here I go to incident related to brute force attack. So this is my incident. I'll select the close incident also. Okay, I've not selected. Not closed. Active. Okay, here. So I've got these incidents. Now, if I click on any of these incident, this incident, for example, the one which is in the middle, if I click on this incident and click on view full details, if I have UEBA enabled in my subscription, in my Azure Sentinel, then I will get UEBA details also along with the incident. And this is where the UEBA details are. These are the UEBA details that you are seeing. That the user was changed, password was changed, top insights. This is coming the UEBA. Action on accounts. So what you see here, I'm saying UEBA capabilities will always be available here. Whenever you, for example, I'm clicking on this IP address. Now, if I click on view full details related to this IP address, I will see UEBA details in the incident dashboard itself to the right next to it, which will always say insight. Under insight, I will see the UEBA details. So UEBA is a great tool that will help me to identify anomalies in user and entity behavior, and that gives me great piece of information as a security practitioner. And it also generates incident. UEBA also generates incidents, or it integrates with analytics rule, and it basically provides you information accordingly. So it's a great capability that you must have enabled in all the, in Sentinel, because it hardly cost anything. Earlier, there used to be a cost of UEBA. Now there is no cost for the service. Only the storage cost is there. So this is where UEBA comes into the picture. In the incident itself, it will show you UEBA, capabilities. Make sense, guys?
Raghuveer, this UABA feature will work on the existing analytics rules which we have created.
This UEBA feature will work on user and entity. Any analytics rule that has user and entity involved in it, UEBA will work there. because there will be some analytics rule where you don't have user information, you don't have entities. Entities is common to all of them. So you will get it for all the existing as well as new, because you've enabled UEBA. So when you have enabled UEBA, it will work for everything. However, as I said, it will need at least 7 to 14 days to capture the trend. So if you enable it today, you will need at least 7 to 14 days. You will need to wait for 7 to 14 days, between 7 to 14 days, between 1 to 2 weeks, and then it will start to work. For each incident, you will start to see the insights. And those insights basically come from UEBA, or those insights are powered by UEBA. This is the right mode. Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, since this is a live environment, you will not see all the data, and we also don't have new incident. Also, UEBA, I only enabled last week, so it has still not completed that period. That is why you're not able to see all the capabilities, but it's a great tool in the hands of admin that you should enable. Now it says, as Azure Sentinel collects logs and alerts from all of its connected data sources, UEBA analyzes them and builds baseline behavior profiles, which is known as trends of your organization's entities, which is user, host, IP address, location, application. So it will create a baseline behavioral profile or baseline behavioral trend of those entities. And then using a variety of techniques and machine learning capabilities, UEBA can then identify anomalous activity and help an admin in determining if an asset has been compromised. So it's all something that is running in the backend, that is bringing intelligence, that is helping you to identify, helping you to give more intelligence to your investigation capability. That is all UEBA is all about, and this is how it works. You can see. So UEBA takes user data from Azure Active Directory and combined with logs and alerts from connected data sources, it builds baseline behavioral profile for entities like Azure AD users, host, IP address, and application. And if you want UEBA to work effectively, you must enable conditional access in Azure AD, because UEBA has great dependency on conditional access service. Because in conditional access service, you configure signals, and UEBA picks up behavior trends from signals. It needs to know the signals. If you don't have conditional access enabled, UEBA will still work, but it will not be that efficient. You will not get that depth of data which with conditional access it can provide. So here's the information. So customers' data is getting ingested into Sentinel, and Sentinel has UEBA engine, which is powered by threat intel, which is powered by its capabilities. And that UEBA engine is basically storing the behavior anomalies into the workspace, which is related to behavior analytics, identity information, user peer analytics, user access analytics. And then all of that information is basically coming into Active Directory with users and group information. So that is where, since the source of intelligence is Active Directory, you must have enabled conditional access and Azure AD identity protection on the top of it. If possible, if you're using P2 licenses or E5 licenses in Microsoft 365, then UEBA will work it will work great. So that's about UEBA capability of Microsoft Sentinel. And these are the data sources that you need to enable for. These are the data sources which are currently available for UEBA. Security events, the one that I've just shown you, Azure Active Directory audit logs and sign-in logs, Azure activity logs, and Office 365 also. So if I had a connector, Office 365 had connector available, I would have seen Office 365 option also. So these are the data sources for which UEBA is available. And data sources selected will be processed, enriched, and profiled by the UEBA engine. And as I said, it will create a separate repository of those behavioral trends and behavioral profiles. And for that separate repository, there will be a substantial amount of increase in the storage cost, But I'm once again saying it's substantial because the size of that repository is not beyond MBs, megabytes. When you have, I would say, so just giving you a fair idea, when the for a 50 GB per day log ingestion, the size of UEBA UEBA repository was 700 MB. So 700 MB of data it is storing, 700 MB per day. Now 700 MB per day into 30, around 21 GB of monthly storage you need to pay for when you have 50 GB of per day ingestion, which is 1.5 terabyte of monthly ingestion will require 21 GB of UEBA space. That's the average, that's the calculation which I am giving you from a project. That is why I'm calling it substantial, because 1.5 versus 21 GB is nothing, but it gives you more capability. So that's what you need to remember. And if you want to reduce that 21 GB, then you should not enable Office 365. You should not enable Azure activity logs. You should only have enabled Azure Active Directory audit and sign-in logs. But then the capability will not work to its fullest. So this is about UEBA, guys. This is a great capability that you need to enable. And these are the entity insights. You know, the user insights comes from this. This is where it gives you user insights. And for entity insights, it comes from here. So this is entity insights. You have syslog logs, you have audit logs, and sign-in logs, office activity. From here, entity insights information comes. And there is a workbook also available for UEBA. So here's the workbook. You can enable this workbook. This workbook provides you UEBA anomalies. However, if we enable this workbooks, we will hardly get anything, because as I said, this has to be enabled for at least a couple of days. So here's the workbook for UEBA. So you can go to analytics. Here's the workbook. UEBA essentials. So you will need to first deploy the solution. And here's the workbook. So first you need to deploy the solution, which will also do the same thing that you have done from the portal, from the settings page. Because now Microsoft is trying to put everything into the solution so that users don't have to do custom configuration. So all you need to do is install this solution, which will automatically enable UEBA capability that we just enabled from setting option. And once this capability is enabled, you will see this workbook, which is a standalone workbook. After this capability is enabled, just install this workbook and you will see UEBA anomalies analytics from Sentinel also. But as I said, this will provide great piece of information only when you have, when you have left it running for 14 days and when you have, substantial data coming into your lab, coming into your environment. Since this is a production environment, you may not have all the capabilities. But this is where you enable the UEBA. Any question on UEBA, guys? So if you have not enabled it in your customer's environment, discuss it with your customer. Similar to this, put together a presentation, show the capabilities of UEBA, and then enable the UEBA for your customer. This will work. Here you install the solution. Let me see if I can get something. I'll just need to, 5 more minutes. Okay, this is enabled. Okay, I can see the configuration of the workbook. I will directly see it under workbooks, under my workbooks. Let's refresh the portal. Things do not run that quick in Azure. You need to give it at least a couple of minutes after enabling a service. Okay, over here. So save it first. I'll save it in East US. This is getting saved. Done. Okay, now it will be shown under my workbooks also here. I refresh it. Okay, no worries. It is taking a bit time. So let's see it from here directly. Okay. See, now you will see the UEBA capabilities of Sentinel. It is just loading. So you can see time range. You can select last 28 days. Now this is a great piece of information that you're getting here. See, UEBA is quickly telling you that there is a username which is not applicable. Now, Quentin, this is for you. Remember, you told me that there are some brute force attack on RDP incidents getting generated. This is where those incidents are coming. So since you had public IP configured on the VM up and running for a couple of hours, that is where brute force attack was happening from the internet. And since it was a brute force attack from internet, the username will always be not applicable. And in my account, there has been 509 incidents with username not applicable. This is the capability of UEBA. So UEBA is quickly telling me the anomaly. And then it is giving me other incidents and giving me the rest of the information. It shows me the incidents, alert count, anomalies count. Right now it says anomalies count as 0 because I have just enabled the service and it has not got enough data to create the behavioral trends and identify and analyze and put together the anomalies. But this is the workbook where you will see the UEBA capabilities. So you would want to enable it for your customer and show them the capabilities of UEBA, which is a great tool in the hands of admin. Okay, rest we will do tomorrow. This is for today. If we don't have any additional questions, we can close the session for today. Now, tomorrow, what is the agenda for tomorrow? So tomorrow we will be starting with automation. We will look at logic app. We already have analytics rule configured. We will integrate. We will create playbooks first, and then we will add playbooks to the action. We will integrate playbooks to the action tab on the analytics rule. Then we will simulate the attack and we will see whether the remediation is happening, automation is working with the help of playbooks. That is what we are going to do from the lab perspective tomorrow, first thing in the morning. And then along with it, we will also see some administrative capabilities of Sentinel side by side. That's the agenda for tomorrow and for rest of the sessions, rest of the 3 sessions that we need to take this week. So let me know if you have any questions, else we will close the session for today.